what it actually looks like is confiscating their survival items, beating people, arresting them, and ultimately just acting violent against a community that is already one of the most vulnerable.
In focus tonight, solutions to homelessness. This past week, tensions flared as the Salt Lake County Health Department cleared homeless encampments in the Rio Grande area of Salt Lake City. Officials say the cleanup was meant to mitigate public health hazards and came after weeks of outreach at the camp through social workers. However, activists who oppose the efforts say officials are not doing enough to help the homeless and are just pushing them from place to place. Now, this is a complicated subject, but we hope to continue the conversation through this discussion. Joining us live in studio tonight is someone who's had boots on the ground as well as help behind the scenes. Billie Scott is the founder of Addict to Advocate. Billie, thank you so much for being here tonight. It's great to see you again.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, first off, tell me about your organization. What prompted you to start Addict to Advocate, and what is the organization's mission?
So we started Addict to Advocate to really bring attention to the unsheltered camps, to provide services for them, to provide a boots on the ground approach, to case management, we offer a laundry service to our unsheltered friends. We help people get signed up for Medicaid, help people get into treatment. We do food, water, and clothing donations pretty regularly. And we started this because many of us ourselves have been unsheltered and have been in active substance use at one time or another. And so we did this just to offer the services to those who need them, the services that we needed when we were out.
Now, our jumping off point in this conversation is the camp abatement in the Rio Grande area. Many people are upset over what happened in the last week with dozens of unsheltered individuals being forced from the camp. What do you know as someone who works with both unsheltered residents as well as the organizations providing resources?
So the camp closures that came last week, they actually did follow several weeks of outreach, of coordinated outreach with several different organizations offering resources to the individuals, and it was done on an individualized approach. So we would go out and have encounters with each individual that would engage with us. And we would offer them services based on their individual need instead of doing the same, let's put everybody in a shelter, let's put everyone into treatment. We went out and tried to do this for, I think we did it for about 3.5, 4 weeks. The initial closure date was actually back in November. However, the city pushed the closure date out to last week to ensure that there were shelters available and that there were beds available. So there was humanity on that side, where I know a lot of the activists are saying that it came 24 hours with a 24-hour notice. That wasn't the case. There was probably about a month's notice where we were actively going out every day, letting people know that it was coming, and there was a lot of coordination and a lot of planning put into it.
Now, not everybody knows why some of these individuals can't or won't move over to a shelter. Now, there are multiple circumstances, right, that contributed to this. So can you help us understand what some of those circumstances may be?
Yeah, so some of the circumstances that people are out on the streets and that are living in an unsheltered life, it's many different things. There's, people come out because of domestic violence, because of substance use, because they've lost their jobs and they've been evicted. It's a really complex situation where not everyone can go to a shelter and not everyone qualifies for resources. And that's kind of the issue there, is that there's a lot of rules and regulations that you have to follow in order to get into certain resources, and not everyone will fall into those.
Yeah, there's no one size fits all approach to everybody, and that applies too for our unsheltered population. You've been working with them for quite some time.
Yes.
And what are some of the gaps that you've seen in the system?
What I was just saying is a big part of it. I know for some people, in order to get motel vouchers, they have to be a certain age and they have to have chronic health issues. That doesn't apply to everyone. Another issue is coupling. We see a lot of that on the streets, where people are part of an actively coupled with a partner and they're not married, so they can't access resources together. So that's another big issue that we're seeing, that we're hoping the city will take into consideration when opening new shelters and opening up resources such as overflow motels.
What would you like to see happen moving forward as we address this very difficult topic of how to get our unsheltered residents back on their feet?
I would like to see somewhat, I don't want to say a sanctioned camp zone, but maybe some sort of tiny home village like they're doing in other states. I know Austin, Texas has a really good model where they bring people in, they teach them a trade, they teach them life skills on how to transition back into living in a home and working a job and doing those type of things. And that's something that I would really like to see our city get on board with.
Oh, this is a conversation we could go on with if we had more time. Now, you've been hearing from Billie Scott, that founder of Addict to Advocate. Billie, thank you so much for being here tonight and having this discussion about our unsheltered population with us.
Absolutely, thank you.
I think homelessness is the most pressing and poignant issue in Salt Lake City today.
That was Salt Lake City Mayor Erin Mendenhall back in September, talking about prioritizing the issues surrounding homelessness. Thanks for staying with us for our second In Focus discussion tonight on solutions to homelessness. Mayor Mendenhall spoke of multiple issues that needed to be addressed, including addiction treatment, as well as health and safety concerns. Joining us now via Zoom is Bill Tibbetts, the Associate Director of the Crossroads Urban Center. Bill, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Can you start by giving us an overview of what homelessness looks like in Utah and who is using services offered by the Crossroads Urban Center?
Okay. So Crossroads Urban Center, we have 2 food pantries in Salt Lake City and a thrift store where we primarily give away clothing items. We've been based in Salt Lake City since 1966, so we've been helping people who are homeless, people who are low income for a really long time. In terms of who's homeless in the state of Utah, there are about 13,000 people who become homeless or check into a shelter at some point each year in the state of Utah. About 3,000, a bit over 3,000 of those people are children. If you you have to remember that, that there are people camping outside who never check into a shelter, and then there are people who there are family, particularly families with kids, who really don't have a home, but they couch surf from place to place. So there are there's a spectrum of people who are homeless. There's a spectrum of people who are unsheltered. Right now, this year, the majority of the people we're serving at our downtown pantry on 400 East are unsheltered. And so we, every day, we're giving, Monday through Friday, we're giving unsheltered people bags of food, hygiene items. Last week, we got an amazing donation of blankets. And so I think we gave away over 150 blankets to people who were either sleeping outside or needed help keeping themselves warm in the place they're staying. So that's who we are, and that's what we're seeing with homelessness in Utah right now.
Now, this is a very complex issue. I know there's no golden answer to how do we solve homelessness, but let's start with housing. What's your take on the criticalness and the importance of housing when it comes to approaching potential solutions for our unsheltered population?
When I started working at Crossroads Urban Center back in 2001, there were a group of men who I would see every single day. They slept outside somewhere near our food pantry, and every day they'd come in and they'd use the phone or use the bathroom, and sometimes we'd give them food. Every day we'd give them water. And the interesting thing is that when we first started building permanent supportive housing for these men, a lot of whom said they camped outside because it's where they wanted to be. When they were given the option of moving into a place that they could afford, that met their needs, almost all of them moved in. And so I think I'm always hesitant to talk about people being shelter resistant, because it's really hard to say, or housing resistant, I think I've seen people who nobody would have predicted would move into housing move into it when it was offered to them. And so I think when I see people sleeping outside, I see people who we have chosen to let fall through the cracks. We've built a system that has gaps in it so that if somebody has a criminal record, it can be very hard for them to find an employer who will employ them. It can be very hard to find a place to live. And so there are people who they don't have housing options, they don't have employment options. There are people who have untreated mental health issues, and before Medicaid expansion began at the beginning of this year, they didn't have a way to pay for it. Now there often is a way to pay for treatment for mental health or substance use issues, but people don't know that they have that. So, there's an education issue there where I think, there are key services that we at the state and federal level have left underfunded for a long enough time that the cumulative impact has led to a growing number of people falling through the cracks. And that now, with rents at the same time, rents going up and up every year, twice the rate of wages are going up, the number of people who are falling through the cracks just keeps on growing. And so I think it's harder. People who could barely make it before aren't making it now.
Bill, we have about 30 seconds left. Real quick, I wanted to ask you, what's the key takeaway that you want people to remember when thinking about our unsheltered population?
Don't give up on people. If we build housing, if we give people the right supports, it's amazing the changes people can make. And so I think just give people a chance. Don't give up on them. It's you just never know what kind of impacts people will make if we can work with them and help them get back on their feet.
Well said. You've been hearing from Bill Tibbetts, the Associate Director of the Crossroads Urban Center. Bill, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We appreciate you being here.
Thank you for having me.
We get approximately $10 million or so across the state for rental assistance and those kinds of things.
Helping the community understand what resources are available, letting people know that there are ways for them to get into shelter is a really important part of what we're trying to do.
That was Rob Westman of the National Alliance on Mental Illness and Salt Lake County Council member Shireen Gorbani talking about the funding appropriated by the legislature last January that was dedicated to helping people suffering from homelessness. However, when the pandemic hit, that money was pulled in case it would have been needed to help with COVID-19 funding. Welcome to our third and final In Focus discussion tonight on solutions to homelessness. Joining us now is Representative Joel Briscoe, who has worked on housing issues for people suffering from homelessness during his time in office. Representative, thank you so much for being here tonight and joining our conversation.
Thank you.
Now let's start with talking about housing purely as a financial issue. As a lawmaker, are there challenges there or ways that we can do better as a state?
Yes, there are, Rosie. This year, voters in Raleigh, North Carolina approved an $80 million bond for affordable housing. 2 years ago, voters in Austin, Texas, approved a $250 million bond for affordable housing. The state of Utah gives less than $3 million a year. At that rate, it's going to take us over 80 years to do what the voters in Austin, Texas did 2 years ago. And we need to get rid of this idea that just by building housing, we're going to help people who don't have a lot of money who are homeless find housing. If you want to put poor people into housing, you have to build a housing that's affordable that they can get into. You can't just build any housing and then hope it trickles down. Trickle-down housing doesn't work to help homeless and poor people get a roof over their heads.
That really puts things in perspective. I mean, comparatively, these cities are similar to Salt Lake City. What's the status of the $10 million that was allocated for homeless services last session?
Do you know, I think it got cut to 5, and perhaps, I'm hoping that we put $5 million in. That's one-time money. I think we started with a $30 million request, 2015. We ended up with 10, and then COVID scrambled budgets, and it's been we've been living in the Mad Hatter or Tea Party world of 2020, but it's significantly reduced.
Now, taking the human element out of the equation, do you know if it's more cost effective to put someone in housing or to help them in another way outside of housing?
Palmer Court and some other housing that Salt Lake City has done for permanent supportive housing, it's much less expensive to help a person get into a place if they've been homeless for a few years than to continually put them through emergency rooms, take them to the hospital. It's much more cost effective. Putting people in housing and helping them have a roof overhead helps them keep jobs and pay taxes. It benefits families, it benefits children, it benefits the stability of neighborhoods and schools. It also produces jobs when people build housing and provide support services. So I'm a little bit perplexed as to why it's so difficult to get people to wrap their head around why we should do more investment in this.
Now, there is a business component to low-income housing. In your opinion, what work needs to be done to make the process for this easier or more attractive?
Everyone wants everyone to have a home, but they want it to happen in another community, not mine. There's a NIMBY problem. We need more YIMBYs, yes, in my backyard. It requires some federal support. I think with the Biden administration, we'll see more federal support for low-income housing, and we need more state support.
Now, is this ultimately a money issue? And if so, is there political will to devote money to the issue on both sides of the aisle?
I would suggest to you that we need more support from everyone right now, and I don't want to pick and choose a party or a group. I think people need to have a roof over their head. It doesn't have to be a grand one, but I don't want to live in a city or a state where I drive by tent cities. And I appreciate all the people on the program tonight who've been doing their piece of the puzzle. I think we all have a role to play here, and we should all work to make sure that everyone has a roof.
And bringing this back to the legislature, what's the legislature's role in solving housing issues when it comes to homelessness?
We need to fund. We need to fund those providers. We need to fund the cities and the counties and help out nonprofits who are providing on-the-ground resources for homelessness. There are waiting lists for people to get help on addiction issues and various other kinds of issues, like we heard from tonight. We need the legislature, you know, Rosie, I'm okay with being frugal and stretching a dollar, but sometimes we're just cheap and we don't want to spend money on something that we know is going to be helpful. And we need to provide the financial resources for all the groups that are trying to get rid of stress and trying to make a better life and a sustainable life for people so they don't have to live on the street.
What are you seeing or experiencing on Capitol Hill when you're advocating for more funding or more resources for our unsheltered residents? Are you getting resistance from your colleagues or more so support?
Do you know, the dialogue, I credit former Speaker Representative Greg Hughes. I credit the Miller family and the LDS Church, Catholic Community Charities. There are a lot of wonderful individuals, nonprofits, and leaders in our state who've raised the profile the last 2 or 3 years. Sometimes we do something for a couple of years and we go, oh, problem fixed, and we have a short attention span. We can't have a short attention span on this. We have to have a long attention span and we have to be committed. It's going to take a long time. We've made some good progress. We need to make more progress and we can't quit.
Representative, I want to give the final word to you. We have time for one last question. What would you like people at home watching to know regarding this topic?
These people are God's children. He loves them like he loves every single one of us. They have struggles that we don't understand, many of them, and it's up to us to provide intelligent resources to make sure that the people who are doing the work can do the work and we can provide housing for people so that they don't have to sleep in the cold.
Now, you've been hearing from Representative Joe Briscoe. We appreciate you so much for being a part of the conversation. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Rosie, for putting this topic on air.